Hello, everyone. Welcome to the inaugural episode of Blue Devil Beat. I'm your host, Ranjan Jindal, here joined by my co-host, Caleb Dudley. Caleb, welcome back, man. How are you doing?
It's good to be back. Summertime's coming to an end.
Tell everyone what you did this summer.
I just got back from Panama doing a nice Duke Engage trip, working with some kids, playing soccer. So got back this week, then came up to kickoff, which we'll talk about here soon, and yeah, back working.
Yeah, it's awesome. ACC Football Kickoff definitely represents the unofficial start of the football season. For those of you who had listened previously to the Cameron Chronicles and the Blue Devil Blitz, thank you for listening. This is our new podcast on Blue Devil Beat. Is going to be a combination of those. It'll be a full Duke sports podcast hosted by us, the Chronicle sports staff. We are going to be, highlighting all of the Duke sports here, depending on the week. Some episodes are going to be focused on football, basketball, and some of the other Olympic sports as well. We'll have on guests from across the sports department to highlight some of their work. And we'll also continue interviewing sports editors from across the country and writers from other student newspapers, because that has been super fun. We've met a lot of amazing journalists who do phenomenal work at their schools. So super excited for this year and super excited to kick us off. You also note that we're doing video for the first time as well, so you can check out our video on YouTube and Instagram. So it should be a great time. And as always, this podcast is brought to you by Duke Stores. Support your favorite Duke team. Duke Stores is home to the only collection of merchandise brought to you straight from Duke University. Go to shop.duke.edu for all of your Duke merch. All right, so like Caleb mentioned, yesterday was the final day of the ACC Football Kickoff. Duke was there along with North Carolina, Clemson, NC State, Boston College, and Virginia Tech. Duke's participants were Manny Diaz, new quarterback Darian Mensah, offensive lineman Brian Parker, defensive lineman Wesley Williams, and Chandler Rivers, who's a lockdown corner for Duke. They were all phenomenal. I was really impressed with hearing them talk. It was obviously a crazy day because Bill Belichick was there and the crowds were nuts around him. But I'll just start off with some overall takeaways from what you what they said. What were some of your takeaways from the message from Duke at kickoff yesterday?
Yeah, I think the first thing before they even started talking was I think Duke picked a great group to bring to kickoff. They all came like matching suits. They all kind of spoke about the team in the same way. So I thought they picked a great group to represent the program. But yeah, so the main thing that stood out to me when Coach Diaz was talking in the main press conference was that he said it's the strongest and fastest Duke team that there's been since David Feely was here, which is saying something pretty serious because Feely's done a really good job with the program. They have a lot of guys coming back. They're an older team than they have been in years past, and so they said if they were getting a relay race or arm wrestle, that they think they can beat any team in the country. But that doesn't necessarily translate to wins on the field. So they said that they're feeling good about their physical shape and looking forward to getting to practice here. So I think Duke will definitely be physically imposing against other teams this year.
Yeah, for sure. It was funny. Diaz said that at the main press conference, and I asked Darren Mensah about Feely, and he was talking about the intensity of those workouts. If you haven't checked it out, last year, Dom Fenoglio took an inside look at a David Feely workout. That article is still up on our website, so definitely check that out. Yeah, you're right. And I think the biggest takeaway, it's kind of similar to that I had, is the line is really going to be the strength of this team. You saw that last year. Last spring, there were about only like 4 or 5 healthy offensive linemen. So the spring game was really tough because there was really not that many bodies and you couldn't really gel and develop continuity. And then this year, you have 4 returning starters on that offensive line. Brian Parker came and really talked about the camaraderie he has. He's roommates with Matt Craycraft. They've really developed a good presence on that offensive line. And I think they pass protected really well last year, but they need get some holes create some holes in the running game for Jacquez Moore, et cetera. We know what the defensive line is going to bring. Wesley Williams was the participant there, but they have tremendous talent across the line with VJ Anthony and Aaron Hall. But the trenches are really going to be elite for Duke, and I think that can take this team from good to great this season.
Yeah, I think the other thing is the depth is a little bit better than it was last year, like you just mentioned. Coach Diaz mentioned a lot of names of young guys that are right behind Williams and Anthony on the D line. Obviously, Bryce Davis is the big name, big freshman coming in, but there's tons of guys that, redshirted last year, played sparingly, but have had good off seasons, it seems like, from what Diaz said. And so I think, he said you're only as good as you're too deep. And I think Duke's too deep will be much better this year than it was last year.
Yeah. And Darian Mensah, we'll talk a little bit about right now, I guess. He is the Tulane transfer. Obviously, was one of the top-rated quarterbacks in the portal. Interestingly enough, he was not a very highly touted recruit coming out of high school. He mentioned that no one wanted him out of high school. He only had 3 offers. Was like the 112th rated quarterback in the country. But he provides a whole new dimension to this offense with his dual threat ability. We saw it in the spring game at times, but I was really impressed with the way how he's really seems to be like a student of offense. He just loves like the X's and O's. He feels like he was really well prepared at Tulane, and I think that he can come into this this system, this up-tempo Jonathan Brewer offense, and throw the ball. He can layer the ball to all three levels of the field. He can extend plays. I think my biggest question for him is, can he take care of the ball and be consistent against top levels of competition? Because when Tulane played some of those bigger teams, he wasn't as consistent. So I don't know. That's my read on Mensa. What do you think he can bring to this?
Yeah, I thought the main thing that stood out to me talking to him yesterday was he said that his superpower was short and intermediate throws. He said, I just simply don't miss those throws to my receivers. And so I think for Duke, that'll help it establish a tempo on offense every single game rather than just going 3 and out on some drives. And so I think he'll be able to spread the ball. He had a pretty great completion percentage last year at Tulane. And so I think he'll definitely be able to spread the wealth. And Duke should have an uptick in offense this year.
Yeah, speaking of spreading the wealth, the people around him on offense, obviously there's the big holes from Jordan Moore and Eli Pankel, leaving two of the most productive receivers in recent Duke memory. But Manny Diaz dipped into the portal as well to get some pieces around them. Andrell Anthony is the Michigan and Oklahoma transfer. Cooper Barkate from Harvard comes in after a 1,000+ yard season there. And then you have a couple other new, not new guys, but younger guys who can step into their own now, Keyshawn Brown and Samir Higgins. When you look at this wide receiver room and the weapons around Darian Mensah, what stands out and who are you looking forward to produce for Duke?
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned the big names there. It's definitely going to be kind of take a little while to figure out the roles of the offense there. Coach Diaz mentioned a lot of them weren't available either because they were still, graduating from their previous school or hurt in the offseason. And so, I don't know how much time Mensah's had to throw to these guys and build a relationship. But yeah, I think if I had to guess, I would say, Higgins, Brown, Anthony, and Barkate would be the starting 4 if they put 4 out there. But yeah, I mean, I think Andrell and Queso are definitely like, the speed guys, and then Samir and Barkate are more your slot guys. So I think that rotation's pretty solid. We have, Chase Tyler there on the depth chart as well, some other younger guys. So I think there's a lot of question marks, but there's definitely potential there in the receiver room.
Yeah, totally agree. And I also think we'll see how it all gels out. But if Anthony can be into his own, like he can take the top off of the defense. He was there at Oklahoma when Dylan Gabriel was the quarterback, and they had some connections there. Yep. So that'll be fun to see. And Jacquez Moore is coming back at running back. He was injured for the majority of last year. He fell victim to the Northwestern turf, unfortunately. Yeah. But he was really, really could never be his full self. But Star Thomas had come in nicely at running back, but obviously he has moved on now. So it's kind of Jacquez Moore's backfield, along with some others, including Peyton Jones. But I think Mensah has the weapons, and with a stronger offensive line, he can have time, and he can develop and make his reads and really show people why he was one of the most highly touted quarterbacks. All right, let's flip it to the other side of the ball real quick. What positional groups are you keeping your eye on this defense for Duke? Is there anyone that stands out? Anybody that you have questions about, or any group that maybe you have questions about as well?
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens in the secondary. Terry Moore was hurt and got hurt in the Gator Bowl to end the season last season. Still rehabbing from that injury, so Duke brought in Caleb Weaver from Sam Houston State, who's a good friend of Chandler Rivers. I talked to him yesterday about it. He said, yeah, we've been playing football together since middle school. And so, he had his part in recruiting Weaver. Weaver was one of the best safeties available in the portal. He was a former walk-on at Sam Houston, ended up being, like all-conference caliber there. So I think, it'll be interesting to see how he plays at the higher level of Power 4. Interested to see when Moore comes back. And then obviously Rivers is great on one side of the field, but you have to have a corner on the other side. So I think Amari Robinson hopefully will fill that role like he did last year, but if not, Jaden Francois from Utah State is coming in probably to play nickel as well. So interested to see how that rotation shakes out.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Diaz did a good job filling that back end with transfers. We'll talk more about this team later on. Thank you guys for submitting some questions on the Instagram and our Twitter. We have a few, about 5 or 6 questions on the mailbag that we'll address later. That kind of goes more in depth into this team. But yeah, I agree. I think the defense is going to be a real strength of this team. I'm excited to see that front 7. You lose a couple linebackers who had come in and transferred in last year. Ozzie Nicholas and Alex Howard were both fantastic, but I think that means this year Trey Freeman's going to really step up, and Nick Morris coming back from injury is probably also going to have a big season, so we'll talk about that later. Let's move on to the bigger picture of this ACC. We also, as part of the ACC Kickoff, filled out our ballots. meaning that we selected our projected order of finish for the ACC, and also the first team all ACC, picking the best players from the conference in each position. We'll start with our standings. Is this a Clemson and everyone else to you, or how do you see this league shaping up at the top? We'll start with the top first.
Yeah, I think for me, it definitely is Clemson and everyone else. You could even tell yesterday at kickoff, it just seemed like they kind of know, everyone kind of knows that they're a league above everyone else this year. But I do think that second tier from about 2 to 7 is really kind of up for grabs for who will make it to Charlotte. I have Georgia Tech coming out of that group just based on they have a lot of returners. Haynes King, obviously, is a veteran. He's been there. He's healthy now. He had a torn labrum last year. Their schedule is pretty favorable. They get Clemson at home, I believe, and they also they have to go to Duke. But so I think I have Georgia Tech there, and then the rest of that group in order, I have Miami, SMU, Louisville, Duke, Florida State. I think all those teams are within one game of each other. Miami obviously brings in Carson Beck. SMU's coming off a playoff appearance last year. Louisville brings in Miller Moss, and then Duke brings in Mensa. And so it'll be interesting to see what shakes out there. But I think all those teams have the potential to challenge to make it to Charlotte and face Clemson.
Yeah, I'm also very high. Agree with you. I'm high on Georgia Tech because that schedule. You're right. I mean, besides those two matchups, there's a tricky one. Pick coming to Georgia Tech. I think Pitt's going to be pretty decent. I'll talk about that later. But other than that, I mean, the schedule is very favorable. And nowadays, the schedule is so important in determining, who can shake out of that top tier. You saw last year SMU had a pretty favorable schedule, and that helped them move up. But I think I'm leaning. I have that trio of Georgia Tech, SMU, Miami as kind of that tier right below, and I think Duke can also slide into there partly because of a favorable schedule, and maybe even Florida State. But I think SMU's being a little bit overlooked. I think that they have Kevin Jennings coming back. He had 2 bad games, one against Duke, obviously, remember, and against Penn State, he turned the ball over a bunch and did not look himself. It was also like negative 100 degrees out there
against the best defense in the country, probably.
Right, and so I do think there's some recency bias there. I think he played phenomenally against Clemson in that ACC championship. He turned the ball over a couple times early, and then those last 3 quarters just ran all over that defense. Obviously, losing the running back is going to be huge, but I think RJ Maryland coming back at tight end gives him some weapons. And I think Rhett Lashley, the head coach at SMU, did a smart job in the portal, putting together pieces that maybe aren't big weapons, but can bolster the line, bolster the secondary. They lose a lot on the front 7, but I think SMU, with a pretty favorable schedule in terms of who they get at home, they get Miami at home, they get Louisville at home. So, welcoming those teams in, and it's obviously tough to play. They're having to travel to Texas. It's pretty far. And so I think that, SMU could definitely face the Tigers in the championship. I also think Miami, their strength is going to be on that line. Mario Cristobal has done a phenomenal job bolstering that offensive line. My worry about Miami is, does Carson Beck have enough weapons around him to really elevate that offense? I think they're going to be more run heavy just because of the nature of the team. I think their offensive line, they're going to push people around, but they're slowly developing, and I think they can challenge Clemson. But right now I have Clemson and SMU in the title. Okay, let's go to that tier below. I think Duke can also slide into that group above. Are there some other teams that you're looking at that could possibly make their way into the conversation? We can introduce our sleepers here too, if you'd like.
Yeah. I have what my sleeper, and I think what your sleeper is, 7 and 8, and that's Florida State and Pittsburgh. Florida State obviously last year was not a good year by any measure. They were, I believe, 2 and 10.
You're correct.
And I may have picked them to win the ACC, and they got 17th, but that's okay. But so this year, obviously, they have completely revamped their team as a result of that. DJ U is out. Tommy Castellanos is in.
Can you try to pronounce it?
I'll pass.
Okay.
So Tommy's in, coming from Boston College. And so, yeah, they're going to, Coach Norvell came on Tuesday and seemed pretty fired up about his team and, a little disrespected after what happened last year. I do think they'll be much better. It'd be hard to be worse, but I think they'll be much better. Squirrel White and Deuce Robinson transfers in are both electric at receiver. They still have Roydell Williams in the backfield, so I think Florida State would definitely be kind of back to not back to championship contention, but back to relevancy in the ACC this year.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's a great pick. I think Florida State, definitely has that chip on the shoulder. And week 1, Alabama's coming to town. Tommy Castellanos wants to play them. We'll see. They'll they'll definitely have some strong weapons. I think Squirrel White last year, I mean, he was dealing with some injuries, but he's capable of a 1,000-yard season. He almost had one at Tennessee. And Deuce Robinson, I think, can be the next Johnny Wilson. I mean, he's 6'6", I want to say. I think he's as
Peak
tall.
dude.
Yeah, he's about as tall as Wilson was, who was, a phenomenal player 2 years ago for Florida State. And so, yeah, I'm with you on that. And I think Duke can, with its schedule and with the line, can also make its way up. Okay, my sleeper, I was debating between two. So I was between Pittsburgh and Virginia Tech for a long time, up until this morning, because it was funny. We were at ACC Media Days yesterday, and we're like, okay, depending on what they say is who I'm going to pick. No, I'm just kidding. That's not what I did. But I think the reason both of those teams are up there for me is I think they have quarterbacks that have the potential to take their team to the next level that maybe we're dealing with injury towards the end of last year that can come back. But I think I'm going to go with Pitt. Here's why. Eli Holstein is the Alabama transfer who is going to be coming back into another season. And, they started 7-0 last year. They kind of won some fluky games, and they kind of fell off when he got injured. But I think those people around him, Desmond Reed, we'll talk about, he is just, such a phenomenal back. I think they really have a 1-2 punch there, and he can help take the load off of Holstein a little bit. We'll see if they have the receivers, but Narduzzi is going to coach a great defense. They have, I think, a great tandem at linebacker, maybe one of the best in the ACC, maybe even nationally. And so I think their defensive floor is a little bit higher than Virginia Tech's is. We'll see what Tech has. And also Kyron Drones is just so up and down. But I will say, I'll just put a sentence about Virginia Tech that I think, if Drones plays to the level he did 2 years ago, the sky's the limit for this team, really, because, their stadium is such a hard place to play in.
Yeah.
They have some pieces around them, and they bring some tough teams to Blacksburg, like Louisville and Miami. So if they can, win those games, that'll be an interesting challenge for them.
Yeah, I think Coach Pry yesterday at Media Day, he seemed pretty confident in his team. It seems like he thinks he has one of the best teams since he's been at Virginia Tech. Last year they were notably 0-6 in one-score games. You would think that would change. The luck would change a little bit. Even if they win 2 more games, they go from 6-6 to 8-4. And so they have a big one to open the season against South Carolina. Coach Price seemed fired up. They'll see what they're made of there. And yeah, I think Tech definitely could, if Drones can become a little more consistent with the new OC. I think they could definitely make some noise.
Yeah, great point. Philip Montgomery comes in, has developed a lot of quarterbacks through his career, most recently at Tulsa. And Drones seems to have a great relationship with him. We like those Virginia Tech guys. They were fun.
They brought a great group, just like Duke. Kevin Gilliam, who I have on my ballot, he was great. One of the best speakers we had all day. And so, yeah, I think Tech, like you mentioned, Montgomery, he worked with RG3 during RG3's Heisman season at Baylor.
Yeah.
So definitely a quarterback guru, and someone that Price and Drones both seem really excited about.
Yeah. And then the rest of the ACC, any other team you want to mention as maybe not a championship contender, but teams you're curious about, have questions about? I don't know.
Yeah, I think both the other teams in the triangle will be interesting to watch. I'll start with State. State fans had high hopes last year. It didn't quite go the way they wanted to. Grayson McCall obviously got hurt, and CJ Bailey came in. Wasn't really the year they wanted to have. They lose Tony Gibson to Marshall. They fire their OC and bring in Kurt Roper, former Duke offensive coordinator. And so, yeah, I think it'll be interesting. They have, they're a younger team now. They have Bailey, Hollywood Smothers, Noah Rogers are all younger guys on offense. So we'll see. And they have Justin Jolie, who's a great tight end. So it'll be interesting to see how they gel and develop with the full offseason. And then North Carolina, obviously, the media firestorm there yesterday was unbelievable. Obviously, head coach Bill Belichick now taking the reins in Chapel Hill. A whole new team. I think I read today they have 70 new players on their roster.
Yeah.
And so, the consensus kind of seems like we'll have to wait and see with North Carolina, but their schedule, looks pretty favorable on paper. Obviously things can change as the season goes on, but they have Clemson at home. The rest of the games, aren't too tough. They have Duke at home as well. And so, that new roster can gel. I think North Carolina could sneak up the rankings too.
Yeah, and their schedule's favorable, like you mentioned. I realize we also didn't talk too much about Louisville, and one thing I was going to mention about Louisville is their schedule is brutal with a capital B, and that's, I think, part of the reason that they're not as talked about is just because, you got to, you welcome Clemson at home, which is better than playing Clemson on the road, but still Clemson on a Friday night. You got to go to SMU, to Virginia Tech, to Miami, to Pittsburgh. That's rough. And I think Jeff Brom is, great with quarterbacks. I think Miller Moss is a bit of a downgrade from Tyler Chuck, but I think he's still a capable passer, but we'll see with them anyway. Yeah, I also think one thing that's interesting about this league is, they talked about the quarterbacks in this league, and I do think there's some interesting quarterbacks from top to bottom, like not just at the top.
Right.
Um, whether it's CJ Bailey, like you mentioned, or the couple out in California, Devin Brown, the Ohio State transfer, goes to Cal. Um, Elijah Brown at Stanford. I mean, Frank Wright is a quarterback guy. I mean, Elijah was very highly touted at a high school. He had some moments last year, but I don't think they're going to contend any of those teams, but maybe a quarterback can have a good game and steal an upset. So I think the quarterbacks at the bottom half of the league are still, somewhat talented. And even at Boston College, there's a little bit of a battle there between Dylan Lonergan and Grayson James. We saw them yesterday, or saw the team yesterday, and they talked about them. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like this league is going to have some strong quarterbacks in it.
Yeah, I mean the ACC obviously believes so too. They advertise conference of quarterbacks all the time at media day the last 2 years. Even I'll mention like Chandler Morris at Virginia. We've touched on Virginia, but North Texas transfer. He was one of the most prolific passers in the group of five. So that's another upgrade for the ACC at quarterback. So yeah, I think from top to bottom, it's pretty competitive at quarterback.
All right, let's go down to our ballots, our players, and
Yep.
we'll take a couple of players on each end of the ball. I'll start with your player of the year. We can do we have the same player of the year?
I think we do. Cade Klubnik.
Yeah, Cade Klubnik. I mean, 2 years ago, it would be crazy to say that he would be the ACC player of the year. I mean, Duke fans knew what happened when he came in and was rattled. But, I mentioned last year that I thought he would be improved, but
Yep.
I didn't think it would be this much. I think he has really, had to face a lot of mental adversity. And I think his coming out party was the second half of that Texas game where he really made some phenomenal throws. I will say the majority of his production last year was against lesser opponents. And so he needs to be more consistent against those top tier teams, because against teams like South Carolina and Pittsburgh and Louisville, he was inconsistent.
Yep.
And even against Georgia to start the year. But the pieces around him are there. We'll talk about them, I'm sure. But he has a wide receiver room bolstered by Antonio Williams, Bryant Wesco, and TJ Moore. One of the best offensive lines that Clemson's probably had since the late teens. And so I think the players around him can have a special season for him. But we're going to see in week one, man, two of the best quarterbacks in the country,
Yep.
Garrett Nussmeier and Cade, will be going at it. All right, let's look at the rest of the offense. Give me 2 or 3 players that were on your ballot or just you want to watch, maybe even positional groups from across the league. But we'll start on offense.
Yeah, on offense, I have Jamal Haynes at running back from Georgia Tech. That backfield is so lethal. We were in Atlanta last year when Haynes and Haynes King and Singleton they tore Duke apart. And so I think they're just so dynamic. Both of them are such hard runners. I think Haynes will have a huge year for Georgia Tech. Both of them are healthy at least to start the season now, and so I think he'll have a dominant year. Have him on my first team ballot. At receiver, I have Chris Bell from Louisville. Him and Colin Lacey both I think are going to have pretty big years at Louisville, but Louisville likes to air it out. They've had a lot of Jamari Thrash, other great receivers there. And so I think Chris Bell is next up there. I'm watching him at Louisville this year.
Yeah, I think those are 2 great picks. I'm excited to see what those players do. For me, we talked a little bit about this. I already talked about kind of Squirrel Wright and Deuce Robinson. I just think that wide receiver group is interesting, and one of them could definitely, at the end of the season, find their way on the first team All ACC, depending on which one it is. But I think that wide receiver group is being is kind of being ignored by a lot of the country, and I think it's always a question when transfers come in, but if it gels correctly, I think it could be great, and I think them and Louisville both have great wide receiver production. I'm going to also say the Miami's offensive line. I put Maui Goa on my ballot, but I think that group has the potential to be, game changing. And I think when you have such a stout offensive line, you can give Carson Beck time. That'll help him out a lot. And I think Maui Goa, and also on the other side of the ball, I'll talk about Ruben Bain, but those are 2 guys that can, take you back to the Miami of, the U of the early 2000s and the 90s and stuff like that. And so that's what they want to be. And those are some guys I'm watching. All right, let's flip it over to defense.
Yeah, so I have another Georgia Tech guy. As you can tell, I'm pretty high on Georgia Tech. That's Cal Efford at linebacker. Last year, he was 3rd-team All-ACC, and he missed like 3 games with injury. And so I think this year, fully healthy again, gives Georgia Tech a great player in the middle of the field. So I have him at linebacker as one of my 3 linebackers on the first team. And then at D-line, I mentioned him earlier, Kevin Gilliam at Virginia Tech. He's had great production at D-tackle, but they're kind of bringing in a whole new defensive line, and he's the leader of that group, the returner. So I think he's set for a big year as Virginia Tech tries to get back on track.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to mention a couple linebackers I put. I mentioned that Pitt linebacker duo, but Kyle Lewis was named All-American last year.
Yep.
First team All-ACC, and he, had 100-plus tackles, and he can really fundamentally change how Pitt, plays on defense. I also think that around him, you have Rasheem Biles, you have other linebackers there, and I think he's poised to have a breakout season, and I would watch them and watch Pitt as a whole. The other linebacker I'm going to mention is Clemson's Sammy Brown. I think a lot of people are putting Wade Woodaz on their ballots, and rightfully so. I think he's talented, but I think Sammy Brown, he's only going to be a sophomore this year, but at times last year, you really saw the breakout power of Sammy Brown. He can be like that Ben Boulware, that guy that's flying all over the field. He's a big guy. Played running back in high school some too, so he's got some elusiveness and quickness along with his size. Clemson's rush defense really struggled last year, and I think the defensive talent on the line now combined with Sammy Brown positions him to have a big year for the Tigers.
Yeah.
What Duke players did you put on your ballot?
Yeah, so I had three. Yeah, three. I had Brian Parker, who I think is pretty surefire. I'm sure he'll end up on the preseason first team. Chandler Rivers is the same way. And then I had Terry Moore as well. I think if he comes back relatively soon at the start of the season, I think he's far and away one of the better safeties in the country. And so him and Rivers are a great duo in the secondary. So I think those three guys were the three guys I had.
Yeah, same here. No argument there. And I think you're right. You made a good point earlier that Chandler Rivers is going to have a good season, which means he's not going to have a lot of balls thrown at him. So Kamari Robinson is really going to have to step up. But I think the secondary, if they can play up to their potential, I'm confident in the front seven. I think this can be a very, very dominant unit for Duke.
Yeah.
Okay, let's finish with some mailbag. Thank you guys for submitting in questions. I think there was, we'll put them into general themes. One theme was kind of, can Duke compete with SEC schools like Bama and Georgia, and can they contend for the CFP? Caleb, what do you think?
Yeah, CFP might be shooting a little high, but I think the path is there. I think part of that comes down to the schedule, like you mentioned before. Duke will have Illinois at home as its big game in non-con, and then they'll travel to Tulane the next week for two pretty big ones. Mensa talked about yesterday. He's fired to play Tulane. I'm sure they'll be fired to play Duke. The home schedule in conference play is NC State, Georgia Tech, Virginia, and Wake Forest. Not the toughest. Georgia Tech will be a tough one. Same between 2 bye weeks. And then the rest, the road games are Syracuse, Cal, back-to-back weeks, which is just a hellacious travel day with the bye week right behind it. And then at Clemson after the bye, which will be a fun one. And then at UConn and at North Carolina. So, Duke realistically could, win 10 of those games, 11 of those games, and, play in the ACC Championship. But I do think, they're still probably a year or two away from competing for the college football playoff and, contending with these big schools like Bama and Georgia at the minimum 2 years.
Yeah, I think the good news is that to compete with those teams, you can't get out physicaled, and I don't think Duke is going to get out physicaled. But you saw against Ole Miss, it was a really big wake-up call in the bowl game just because, Jackson Dart is obviously phenomenal, but that was just another level of talent across the board. Obviously, Duke, was a little banged up there, but still, you got to see what those teams can do offensively when they're explosive. And so I think by bringing in Mensa, you can combine that physicality with a little bit of explosiveness, and then you can contend. I agree with you. The schedule is favorable, but it's a little bit there's some questions like those trips, and somebody asked ceiling and floor. I think ceiling, I don't think Duke goes into Death Valley and wins, no matter how good it plays, honestly, unless Clemson lays a stinker.
Right.
And I think the rest of the games, I think a reasonable ceiling is about 10-2.
Right.
For Duke. I think individually you can probably say Duke wins the rest of the games, but as a combined tandem, probably not.
Right.
That's kind of my ceiling, 10-2. And then as a floor, you lose at Clemson, you lose the Georgia Tech game, you lose Illinois, you lose one of the Syracuse, Cal, maybe lose at UNC, and I think you see it about a 6-6, 7-5. I don't think Duke goes below that, unless something really goes wrong. But I that's kind of my ceiling floor, 6-6, 7-5ish to 10-2.
Yeah, when I was thinking about this question on the way here, the floor, what I think the worst case scenario would be Virginia Tech last year. It reminds me exactly of that.
Yeah.
I think, if Mensa is inconsistent like he was against top talent last year at Tulane, just like Drones was at Virginia Tech, that article that you wrote about Duke, taking teams in the fourth quarter and dominating in the fourth quarter and what they call bringing them into the sewer. that could easily flip. No matter how out physical and strong Duke is. And so I think they were 5-1 last year in one score game,
6-1, yeah.
6-1. So that flips to 1-6, and then all of a sudden you're in trouble. So I do think this. I think you're right about I think 6-6 or 7-5 is probably the floor, but I could see there being some real troubles as Duke tries to mesh a lot of the new pieces together on offense.
Yeah. All right, let's move to stats leaders. So also, let's shout out the GA scumbags here who put this question in. We met them yesterday. Noah and Tyler, great guys.
Absolutely.
Check out their podcast if you haven't already. They do great stuff, and it was fun to see them yesterday.
Yeah.
We'll go receiving and tackling for this question. Start with tackling, maybe.
Yeah, I think we have the same.
Yeah.
I think Trey Freeman is probably pretty securely going to be the tackling leader. He's coming back another year starting at linebacker. He's been great so far for Duke, and so I think he'll be wearing the green dot. He'll be calling the plays. I think he'll have plenty of tackles for Duke.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, catches. I think we're different here. I have Cooper Barkate. I think he had 1,700 yards last year at Harvard, which is an insane amount. He was an FCS All-American. And then yesterday, Mensa talked a lot about he was really impressed with his route running in his hands so far in the offseason. So it seems like he's been more readily available, not injured. And so I think as Mensa tries to get more comfortable, I think he could be a good security blanket there in the slot for Mensa.
Yeah. I'll just say with Trey Freeman, it was funny because last year he flew a little bit on the radar, I think to no fault of his own. I think initially it was probably adjusting a little bit to Pat Key's scheme, took him a little bit. But, Alex Howard and Ozzie Nicholas were just playing phenomenal. I mentioned this earlier, but there were games. I mean, Ozzie Nicholas was flying all over the field. Alex Nicholas was really good at getting to the quarterback. I mean, so they kind of took away his production in terms of tackles. But I think we can go back probably to the 2020, 3 Trey Freeman at times when he had those games against. I remember we covered that NC State game. He had 15 tackles. Against Notre Dame, he had 13. But, in 2024, he still finished with 67 tackles, which isn't bad at all. But I'm excited to see him do that. And he had some big plays last year. It seemed like even though he wasn't tackling last year, he made the game-winning play on a lot of games, like the game-winning interception against North Carolina. That was more of a right place, right time type of play. But, he's on the field and he's a big play guy. And I see that happening. On offense, it was interesting. Duke ran a lot of screens last year with Quayshawn Brown. And so I think receptions-wise, I think he could, contend for the top because you'll run a lot of those. And now you have better tight end play. And like Mensa said, he's very accurate on those short throws. And Brewer, those screens are really good in high-tempo offense. And so he can do those. And he can also, take the top of the defense and be a good deep ball guy. He has good ball skills, good hands. And so I think he could do that. I also mentioned, I said, if Anthony can put it together, who knows what the fit is and who knows if he's going to put it together. But, he could also, in terms of receiving yards, get a bunch of big plays and lead the team in yards in that sense. But I think I'll go with Quayshawn for receptions right now.
Yeah. I do think it's, fair to mention. We haven't mentioned tight ends at all yet, really. You just mentioned it very briefly. I think it is important to say, I don't think they'll lead in receptions by any stretch, but I do think, Duke last year struggled with tight end health a lot. They lost Jeremiah Hazley very early in the season. And Tony Boggs ended up starting started as the 4th string and ended up starting at some points in the season. So I think Duke now has Jake Taylor, Jeremiah Hazley, Landon King from Utah, and Tony Boggs all healthy and available. And so I think that'll be great for Mensa just in terms of, having better blocking up front and also, having another big target in the middle of the field. And Brewer likes to use the tight ends. And so I do think that'll be helpful now that they'll lead the team in receptions or yards.
Yeah.
Just another helpful aspect to the offense.
Yeah, and lastly, offense or defense better. I think even though the offense is going to get better, I think this team is still, the strength is in the defense. Manny Diaz is a defensive guy. You saw so many of those close games that you mentioned, that 6-1 record. That's the defense getting a stop to win the game. I think the offense is going to be much improved, but I still give it to the defense.
Yeah, I mean, Wesley Williams yesterday said, we think the offense is going to be great, but we're prepared to win every single game for Duke if we need to. And I think, there'll be times where they probably will need to do that. I think Williams and Anthony are just so complimentary on the at defensive end. They're so good together. And Wesley mentioned, we're roommates. I think we play so well together. And you have Aaron Hall and then Josiah Green from Dartmouth coming in at D-tackle, and that's 2 big bodies with guys that have played a lot of college football. And so I think it all starts up front, and I think Duke has one of the better fronts in the conference. So I definitely think defense is ahead of offense as of right now.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for submitting those and for listening. Hope you liked this new podcast, new format. We're excited. We're going to take a few weeks off as we finish this summer, but we'll be back for a new podcast as we get closer to the football season, we may do more of a national conversation.
Yeah.
Our playoff picks, those will be fun. Preview the season. Duke's going to kick off against Elon, Wallace Wade. That'll be fun.
Yep.
Check out our article on DukeChronicle.com from the ACC Kickoff. We'll have also, next week, we'll publish our full ballot and ACC's predicted standings that we have. You'll also get, I'm sure our beats will have a bunch of good preseason coverage. We'll do full positional previews for everyone at Duke on our website at DukeChronicle.com. Follow us on Instagram at the Duke Chronicle. You'll see clips from here on there and a bunch of our articles as well on there. And yeah, man, kickoff was fun. Anything else you want to say about that?
Yeah, I'm super excited about this new podcast. I think it'll be great. Thanks everybody for listening, and yeah, looking forward to keep recording.
If you're a student, have a great rest of your summer. We will see you shortly in the fall. For Caleb Dudley, I'm Ranjan Jindal. This has been Blue Devil Beat.